Hello, gorgeous, and welcome to the Midlife Re-Alignment. I'm your host, Esther Blum, and I'm here to disrupt the narrative on perimenopause and menopause with humor, nutrition, hormones, and fierce self-advocacy. Together, we'll rewrite your story and the rules because there's a light at the end of the vaginal tunnel. Let's go. Cynthia Thurlow is a nurse practitioner, host of the Everyday Wellness podcast, author, and international speaker with over 15 million views for her second TEDx talk on intermittent fasting, transformational technique. With over 25 years of experience in health and wellness, Cynthia is a globally recognized expert in perimenopause and menopause and intermittent fasting, and has been featured on ABC, Fox 5, KTLA, CW, Medium, Entrepreneur, and The Megyn Kelly Show. Her mission is to help empower women to live their most optimal lives in perimenopause and beyond. And I am blessed to have Cynthia in my inner circle of friends, and I truly hope you love her as much as I do. Cynthia Thurlow, my queen.
So good to be here, my friend.
You should all know how we met was I was a guest on Cynthia's podcast and we became fast friends.
Yeah, I think it was your PR team pitched you. And for anyone that knows me, I review all the pitches to my podcast and I am viciously selective. And it was like, as soon as I read your bio, I was like, of course, this makes sense.
And I was so excited because I was like, I was very grateful to have made the cut. So this is really a full circle moment. And what an honor and joy to have you here. So I'm going to jump right in with the menopause gut because I think it is a Bible for all midlife women. Let's jump in and talk about your trip to Morocco and how not only your E. coli and Giardia, because you're an overachiever, coupled with your microbiome shifts in perimenopause, created quite the internal chaos for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think about this and it makes me laugh now, but this was 2018. And obviously I was still firmly in the perimenopause space, but no one had really taught me much about how the decline in hormones impacts our immunity. And so we're on this romantic vacation. Todd and I ate the same food. One of us got sick and one did not. And I will say that I'm very, very grateful that the sickness started once I got to Spain and not in Morocco, which is a whole conversation for a different day, because there's nothing worse than being in an airport bathroom and not feeling well. And so by the time I got to Spain that very first night, I spent the entire night vomiting, having horrific diarrhea. And of course, in my mind, as a medical professional, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm vomiting so violently. I'm concerned I may tear my esophagus. And that's something called a Mallory-Weiss tear for any medical nerds out there. But I saw plenty of them working in the ER years ago. And so I didn't feel well for a couple days, to the point where I didn't eat much. I remember on day one, we were going to see the Alhambra, which, I mean, for anyone that's ever been to southern Spain, is just breathtakingly beautiful and so significant. I love the architecture. I love everything about southern Spain. I just love Spain in general, but we were there and, I was trying to make the best of it. And, my symptoms slowly improved and then I went home. And then of course I got E. coli when I was in Toronto a couple months later, and then obviously led to this long hospitalization. But it didn't occur to me, Esther, until a year or two later that there might be more going on than just crappy luck, which I think many people said, oh, terrible luck, got food poisoning twice, then ended up in the hospital. And then you were obviously very, very sick. But now, as I understand the impact on immunity as estrogen is declining, as progesterone is declining, it was the absolute perfect storm for what happened to me. And the irony is, I had no idea. Nothing had prepared me for anything around perimenopause, not my GYN, not my mom, not my girlfriends. I think most of us were stumbling, the Gen Xers were stumbling into perimenopause going, what the hell is happening? Because I'll be the first person to say that perimenopause is a litmus test. It is a litmus test of how well we are taking care of ourselves or not. It's a litmus test for patterns that we learn as teens, 20s, and 30s that serve us well at that time period when we have optimal hormones and we can get away with not sleeping as well. We can get away with maybe our nutrition not be totally dialed in. However, perimenopause, those adaptive patterns can become incredibly maladaptive. And for me, like so many of your listeners, I was doing everything wrong for my physiology in early perimenopause. And it took a Herculean effort to, number one, acknowledge what I was experiencing. Number two, to find providers that supported me in the capacity that I wanted to be. And number three, like leaving conventional allopathic medicine 10 years ago was one of the most challenging things I have ever done, but is absolutely without question. And the 10-year anniversary is Wednesday, so 2 days after we record. The significance of that now is not lost on me, that was absolutely what I needed to do. It may not be the right thing for everyone to do. Let me be very clear. You don't necessarily have to do something quite so dramatic. But for me, I felt like I had to change everything to be able to support my body in middle age. Because what I did before, as successful as I was, as happy as I thought I was miserable in perimenopause, and I was very likely contributing to all the reasons why I was miserable, not realizing it, like all these well-intentioned decisions that we make. And I think back now and I'm like, oh my gosh, like who is that person? Because I don't recognize her now. So you asked me about that trip to Morocco, but I think the trip to Morocco did not happen to me so that I would suffer through a long period of time. It was to really catapult the pre-Cynthia and the post. Like I talk very openly that the person I was before I was hospitalized and almost died is not the person I was after. It forever changed me. It changed me in every way you can imagine, physically, mentally, spiritually. Imagining being so sick that I could have not been here for my family. Yeah. If that doesn't change you as a person, I don't know what does. And so it just gave me tremendous clarity about how I wanted to live intentionally for the rest of my life. Because I think so many of us, Esther, our generation, we were latchkey kids, we were free roaming kids. I mean, we were the last generation that lived without social media, without, smartphones. I think it was a blessing in many ways, but we lived very differently than people do now. Like now there's just a preponderance, there's over information everywhere. We didn't have that. And so I think that it's both a good and a bad thing. I think in many ways it's allowed us to live very differently than our parents' generation. We're living very differently than younger generations are going to live. And, I think we're really helping to change the narrative for women just in general. Gen Xers are not going down quietly.
No, and you're definitely the alchemist. And I love that you're coming up on the full circle of 10 years. I mean, that was really the genesis of your transformation, and you're going rogue from Western traditional medicine into a more functional model. But it's not an easy lesson to learn. And, it wasn't until I saw the photo you posted on social with the NG tube in and your incision sites. And I was like, holy shit, this was really, it's one thing to hear you say it, but the photo really drove it home. And I looked at that photo of you, Cynthia, and I was like, you were a different version of yourself then. You weren't the person I recognize today at all.
No. And it's interesting because I had all those photos. My cousin took that photo. She's a physician. She flew down because she was like, Todd needs to worry about the boys. They were much younger. But I remember, I look at that photo and I remember being depressed, despondent. I remember 5 days in, I had lost so much weight. I was 105 pounds. I'd lost so much weight that they wanted to start, what this is, TPN, so total parenteral nutrition. And honest to God, I looked at the doctor and said, doesn't that have soy in it? And my cousin grabbed my arm and she said, if you don't let them give you food, you're going to die. I don't know how else to be clear about this, but if you don't let them feed you, you're going to die. You look like a skeleton. You've lost so much muscle mass so quickly. Yeah. And when she took that photo, I was probably on day 5 and I was so despondent. And so when I look at that, I'm like, wow. You look at that photo and you, in one moment, you relive everything that you experienced, but you're also like, oh my gosh, that is what brought me to where I am now. So it's part of my story, but it's not a part of my story that I look back at and go, God, that was fun. That was not fun. That was not a fun experience to be a patient in a hospital, like at all. Getting, as you know, you get some stellar care and you get some terrible care. And I was so triggered by some nurses that were like, my NG tube got pulled out 3 times, not because of me, because those 1 or 2 nurses were totally incompetent. So when the night nurses came on, I would literally just sleep because I could like let my guard down and just relax. But I remember years later, I ran into one of them in Target, and it was like I had this total fight or flight experience. I was like, oh my God, it's that woman who almost, killed me. Yeah.
Nurse Ratchet in aisle 3 at Target.
Yeah. I remember it was like my husband looked at me like, what's going on? It's like, yeah, that would be one of the nurses that was not great. Most of them were fantastic, but I had a couple that were terrible.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And how long did it take you before you could even emotionally, mentally, spiritually make sense of that whole journey?
A long time. I think it took years. I mean, I think it took a lot of therapy and Reiki work and energy. I mean, like doing all the things and still not necessarily dealing with poking the bear. Like the bear was, I almost died. Todd and I didn't talk about that. That was too scary. That was like so incredibly uncomfortable to say out loud. And I knew it intrinsically, especially because I felt a strong sense of spirit or God or the universe, whoever you believe in, was there with me, giving me choices. And it was, I want to live. I have little boys I need to get home to. But for me, it took years emotionally to be able to wrap my head around it because it was just too painful. Sometimes when something is too painful that we've experienced, it's easier in our minds to just not talk about it. If we don't talk about it, then it's not real. But I remember when Todd and I first had that conversation, and he was like, I was terrified when you were hospitalized because they were telling me how sick you were. And he's like, you weren't talking about it because you were just trying to survive. And I said, yeah, it's unbelievable how one processes emotions. I mean, obviously now I've processed it, but I can tell you for a long period of time, anytime I talked about February 17th through March 2nd of 2019, I would get a visceral like sickness. It was like my body was trying to process all those emotions. Like you can process physically what's happened, but emotionally and spiritually, that's hard to do.
Yeah. And like most women, you just kept moving on because you were caring for your boys, you're building your business, and like you didn't have time or make the time or even have the emotional bandwidth to just stop and sit with it and grieve and process. And it is, even listening to you, I'm like on the verge of tears. It's a very intense ride. And thank God you did the healing. The Reiki work, I think, is some of the most profound healing work out there. What was pulled out when you did your Reiki work? What came through for you?
I mean, it was like, so for listeners, I had my appendix removed, but I had a whole slew of complications. And it was like between scar tissue, like real scar tissue, I remember when I actually had my appendix out 6 weeks later, my surgeon saying, your body walled up the appendix. Like it was unbelievable. It was clearly sick. But she's like, the amount of adhesions and the amount of scar tissue that you developed in such a short period of time, even though we were on top of the antibiotics and all those things. So Reiki work was largely concentrated on like the sacrum. Like she just kept saying, I'm just pulling all of this out, like the abscess, the fistula, the this, the that. And she said, all the pain, like you said to me that everything they did to you was painful, physically painful, like interventional radiology, regular radiology. Every time I went down to have another procedure, another image, it was like everything was painful and like truly painful. And so she said, I could see all of that. Like it was almost like I was just pulling and pulling, like pulling scarves out of your body. And so it was interesting to me that I think it was a combination of like somatic therapies, talk therapy, Reiki work. All those layers are what allowed me to get to a point where I've been able to have so much growth, like so much conversations. I mean, that's where Substack has become this really therapeutic place for me to talk about deeper subjects in a way that I think people really connect to, because I think there's this perception, like for all of us on social media, people perceive what they want when they see you. They perceive that you grew up a certain way. They perceive your certain socioeconomic status. They perceive. And yet I always say sometimes the strongest people have carried the biggest weights throughout their lives, and they just choose not to make it part of their identity. Like, obviously it is part of your identity, but I don't walk around saying, this is my childhood, this is my young adulthood. I just learned to kind of acclimate, move through it, talk about it, get some therapy. As I jokingly say, I'll be in some form of therapy for the rest of my life. But that imprinting is imprinted all of us. All of our experiences imprint us and show up in different ways in middle age. I think that's the litmus test, that the wheels fall off the bus when hormones decline, when neurotransmitters shift, when coping mechanisms that used to be adaptive are no longer adaptive, they become maladaptive. People are given the opportunity to pause and reflect. How you choose to move through middle age, to me, demonstrates how much work you have done, because it's easy to say, I've achieved, but that doesn't really impress me, because what I find far more interesting about people is, like, what's your internal dialogue? What is your real story? What are the things that you are investing to ensure you don't replicate patterns? You don't bring your traumas and your stressors forward. It's like, yes, we all experience stress. Yes, we have all experienced traumas, micro traumas throughout our lifetime. It's how we address them, deal with them, process them, that I think is far more impactful and important. And I think in many ways, whether it's Gabor Mate's work or any of the, Nicole LePera, all these people who have really taken my learning times 1,000, I'm like, oh my gosh, I've learned so much through learning through them. I think that is the challenge of middle age. I think for a lot of people, they just fly at 30,000 feet, and I'm just not one of them. It's like, I want to deal with the shit and get into it and process it and move through it and just be a happy, healthy, centered, grounded individual. Because at the end of the day, that's what's most important to me, not stupid metrics that don't matter. There's a lot of that out there.
Yeah, but I think this whole journey, and especially the last 2 years, correct me if I'm wrong, but what I have witnessed, especially in the last 2 years, has been this incredible expression of the self in a very vulnerable but powerful way. And that, I think, is what makes you an exceptional leader in the field, because not only do you have the true life experience, but you've walked through the fire. You have worked through, and we'll come back to the emotional trauma piece of all of this in childhood, is, walking through that journey has informed exactly where you have arrived at now. And so it's, what did not kill you made you stronger.
Yeah.
is the truth.
I think that, I think that's the case for all of us, that we can take our greatest pain and ensure that it just makes us like, what's the lesson to learn here? That's always when something not so stellar happens, and that's part of life, right? I mean, I think you and I have talked a lot about how from June of 2024 till December of 2025 was like probably the hardest stretch of my adult lifetime, those 18 months. But I'm like, what was the lesson? That was always like, what is the lesson? What am I meant to learn here? What am I meant to never replicate or tolerate ever again? Because that is where the true magic happens, when we realize, number one, we're totally capable. Number two, we have to demand better for ourselves. And I'm not talking about like you go to the store and you demand better for yourself. I'm just talking about intrinsically, deeply in life. What do you deserve? And what do you deserve to ask for, to expect? Because I think for a lot of women, and certainly myself, I was that happy little people pleaser my entire life. Why was I a really good NP? Because I worked in a field predominantly with men. And I was the affable, agreeable, pleasant, smart, capable nurse practitioner. In that practice I worked in with these, very mostly male cardiologists. Thankfully, towards the end, there were more females coming into the field, which was fantastic. But how did I manage? I managed because I learned patterns as a child and young adult that bared really well for me at that stage of life. But now I look back, I'm like, who was that person? Because I don't like anyone telling me what to do. My husband, in fact, will be the first person to say to you, Esther, my wife does not tolerate, especially a guy, does not tolerate men dictating what she needs to be doing. Like, she will completely do a 360 and walk away from something because that doesn't work for me. In fact, I say that far too often now. I'm like, that doesn't work for me.
That doesn't work for me. I don't wanna.
No, I'm like,
not
no,
gonna.
thank you. No, thank you. No, thank you. No, thank you. No, thank you.
And fuck right off.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. In fact, I use that word more often now than I think I ever did growing up in New Jersey, which says a lot.
Well, while we're here, do you want to stay on the trauma conversation, or do you want to talk about the gut microbiome and then circle back? We can go either way. You tell me.
Well, they're all interrelated. And I don't know how many women know that things we experience as children, young adults, imprint our microbiome substantially in a way that is so profound that when I was writing this book, The Menopause Gut, I was like, wow. My editor actually asked me, do you really want to write about this? And I said, yes, I think it's important because I have the experiences to be able to say, I experienced a lot. I didn't realize what I experienced was not normal or was not what most people experienced until I went off to college, and then, it just kept unwinding from there. Maybe it's important to explain to listeners what the gut microbiome is, because most people are like,
yes,
what?
Please.
So the gut microbiome is 40 trillion, with a T, viruses, bacteria, fungi, and protozoa that are found in the large intestine or colon. And it communicates with every organ system. There's a gut ovarian axis that impacts when we go into menopause. There's a gut bone axis. So it is not just about losing estrogen that drives bone health issues. It's also the gut. There's a gut brain axis, and it goes on and on and on. And the microbiome is heavily influenced by how we are born. So whether we're a vaginal delivery or a C-section, whether we're breastfed or formula fed, there's nothing we can do about it now, but it does imprint the microbiome. And there's kind of 3 key times in a woman's life that the microbiome takes kind of a dramatic shift in response to hormones. So this is called the microgenderome, which was a new term for me, but it's really speaking to puberty, not surprisingly, pregnancy if we choose to become pregnant, and then perimenopause. The irony being, up until puberty, young men and young women's bodies, their microbiomes are fairly similar, but it's the influence of the composition of these hormones that starts to delineate and this distinction between both genders. The irony being, after perimenopause, when women are in menopause, our microbiomes start to resemble a male's again, but it's not to our advantage. Much like a lot of things in menopause, it doesn't necessarily work to our advantage. And so I oftentimes will remind people the microbiome is, I think, the key longevity organ. We talk a lot about muscles. We talk a lot about a lot of things. I'm the first person to say, if your gut is not optimal, if your gut microbiome is not healthy heading into perimenopause, you are going to experience more symptoms. Yeah. You are likely to experience more bone issues, more brain health issues, more cardiovascular risk issues, as well as a milieu of other things. And I think that we kind of started this conversation talking about how the gut microbiome is integral for, our emotional experiences, and why, when we're navigating this decline in hormones, we might see more anxiety, we might see more depression, we're going to see more insomnia. But so much of that can be exacerbated and imprinted by our earlier experiences. And this is not to suggest, every kid growing up probably at some point gets bullied over something, whatever makes us unique. Like, I laugh now at the things that I got teased for, which now people spend a lot of money on. Like, I've always had very full lips, and they were much fuller when I was younger. I got made fun of for that. I got made fun of for a myriad of things I had no control over. But I think about all the little imprints that we get throughout our lifetime, and having, for me, an alcoholic father who was on the spectrum and a narcissistic mother, and they were both very physically and verbally abusive, but I didn't know any differently. So the way that I grew up in my household was to be quiet and be the good girl. So if I got good grades and I didn't make a lot of noise, no one bothered me. And that was important. And so I kind of grew up in that environment, which, bared well for doing well with socially and academically, and until it doesn't. So I think for a lot of people, they might end up, they might necessarily have to have something so dramatic. They could have grown up with neglect. Like there's definitely emotional neglect, but some people just get one of those things. And there's actually a joint venture that was made by the CDC and Kaiser Permanente looking at adverse childhood events and looking at higher rates of disordered relationship with food, autoimmune conditions, poor metabolic health, earlier menopause. So for anyone who thinks that our childhood is irrelevant, I invite them to consider the possibility that our imprinting as children and young adults has a lot to do with how we age, how we choose to view the world, and how we successfully navigate middle age and beyond. Because we are always given opportunities to change our minds, change the way we react to things, change the way that we perceive ourselves. So if someone's listening and they're like, I'm 56 years old, I'm in menopause, post-menopause, is there hope for me? Absolutely. We always have the opportunity to impact not just ourselves, but our microbiome. Like the microbiome is so dynamic. Like even changing your diet within 2 to 3 days, you're going to see shifts in microbial diversity, detoxification, all of these things. It's not too bad for you. You grew up in a less than ideal circumstance growing up, and now you're imprinted for the rest of your life. I think some of the most dynamic people that I know have had pretty hard upbringings, and we live to tell the tale. Like, isn't that part of our story? I think in many ways it's like, I want women to know that you can grow up in less than ideal circumstances, work your way through that, and still be very successful. Like I think all the time, I say this, I have a couple family members that I really credit for keeping me grounded, and I always had great girlfriends. Like wherever I have been, some of my oldest friends are from, honest to God, first grade, middle school, high school, college, post-college. Like I have girlfriends through the trajectory of my lifetime, and I credit them with keeping me grounded, because I think that's made all the difference. And I think for a lot of people listening, they'll listen to this and say, oh yeah, maybe like their grounding people were like, maybe they had a really, really strong family ties, or maybe they, really threw themselves into their work and that was cathartic, or maybe they've had incredible therapists and mental health specialists. And I jokingly say, but I'm not joking, I've been in therapy since my 20s. So we're talking about like on and off over 30 years of therapy. And I think I'll always be in some form of therapy to kind of work through my stuff, because it's almost like peeling an onion. You peel an onion, layer the onion back, and there's something else I got to deal with, or I get triggered, not so much about my kids, but there'll be things that happen in my professional life where I'm like, oh, okay, I didn't learn that lesson, so now I got to learn it again. And this time I'm not going to have to go through that again, because this time I'm going to ensure I demand different dynamics, different relationships. And you and I know what we're talking about here. Showing up for us until we learn the message, or we learn the lesson. And that's life. And that is, as Sean Stevenson says, life is lifing. And I'm like, oh yeah, that resonates. I get that.
Hey, gorgeous. If you're feeling like a complete stranger in your own body right now, listen up. The cravings, the energy crashes, the sleep that's gone sideways, the weight that won't budge no matter what you try. That's not just aging. That's not just your new normal, and it absolutely is not inevitable. It means your nutrition isn't matched to your hormones, and that is a fixable problem. I built my Macro Reset program for you. It is a self-paced program that teaches you exactly how to eat for this chapter, personalized to your body, your metabolism, and your life. No restriction, no starvation, and no one-size-fits-all nonsense. Grab it at estherblum.com/macros. The link is in the show notes. You're so welcome. Back to the show. Can you speak to how trauma informs the microbiome? How does that affect, and how does the microbiome then affect our hormones in midlife?
Yeah, so it's interesting. The research around the impact of ACE, high ACE scores or childhood trauma, is that it rewires the autonomic nervous system. So we've got the parasympathetic, sympathetic nervous system. It rewires our nervous system. We are much more hypervigilant. I would be the first person to say I'm like a duck swimming across the lake. Like I look calm on the outside and I'm like revved up on the inside. That is a direct response. So people that grow up with significant adverse childhood events definitely have not only a rewired nervous system, they also tend to have higher levels of cortisol. And cortisol, unfortunately, gets a bad rap. It's like one of these hormones that it can't get a break. It's always something. Cortisol in the right amounts is like the Goldilocks effect. Cortisol, when it's elevated over time, is caustic to the body. So if your cortisol is up, your glucose is up, your insulin is up, you're going to be insulin resistant, you're going to break down muscle. Cortisol is a catabolic hormone. It'll break your muscle down. It weakens your immune system. So you are more likely to deal with leaky gut, which means you are more likely to develop an autoimmune condition. When I finished my nurse practitioner training, I'm fairly certain maybe we knew 30 autoimmune conditions. Now there's over 100, including things like long haul COVID and chronic Lyme. And women are 4 to 5 times more likely to develop autoimmune conditions in middle age, but we make up 80% of the autoimmune conditions overall. So just to give you an idea, we are much more likely to develop an autoimmune condition. And once you have one, you're more likely to have others. It's kind of like this domino effect. We also know chronic cortisol activation is going to break down bone. That's something a lot of people don't even think about. We're more likely to be more inflamed. And inflammation is another kind of quirky thing that people think is just hooey, but acute inflammation, you trip and fall, you skin your knee, that's acute inflammation. We're talking about the chronic stuff that over time is really at the basis for nearly every chronic disease state: high blood pressure, diabetes, fatty liver. Many of the cancer diagnoses that we're getting, we believe, are really starting in the basis of chronic inflammation. Mm-hmm. But I think for a lot of people, they're surprised to know cortisol over time can be problematic. How does this weaken the gut? Well, I just mentioned this propensity for leaky gut, small intestinal hyperpermeability can also impact a very special group of bacteria in the estrobolome, which is our estrogen processing facility in our microbiome. And what's interesting is if you are in a chronically stressed state, you are not in a state where you can actually break down, assimilate, absorb, and detoxify your food. So I always think about when my kids were younger and I would stand at the kitchen island and I'd be feeding them and I'd be eating off their plates, or like eating standing up, or eating in the car, or eating when I was yelling at someone. So you're like not in an optimal state. You don't secrete enough hydrochloric acid, digestive enzymes. As estrogen declines, you also get changes and alterations in breaking down fat. So bile is this way that your body breaks down and emulsifies fats, not to mention the fact detoxification is so important. And it's not detoxification in the form of something in a box. Like, I think social media does a great job convincing us we need like this potion pill or powder to help our bodies detoxify. And I'm like, well, we breathe, we sweat, we poop, we pee. The liver is the main site of detoxification in our bodies, but by the time we get to middle age, it's working overtime, considering how much we're exposed to in our environment, personal care products, and food. So we talk about the microbiome vis-a-vis the estrobolome. The estrobolome's main job is to help break down and detoxify and rid our bodies of excess estrogen. I'm oversimplifying things, but the main side, there's 2 phases of detoxification in the liver, then it goes to the gut, and the gut is supposed to package it up and poop it out. And yes, I just said poop, but it's really important to understand, like, that is important to make sure you're having a bowel movement every day or pooping every day. But if you don't break it down properly, either due to a terrible diet, chronic stress, toxins you're exposed to, alcohol, etc., your body can recirculate it. It can recirculate the estrogen that your body is desperately trying to package up and get rid of. And this can magnify all the symptoms of perimenopause. And when I say all the symptoms, the weight loss resistance, the brain fog, the mood disorders, the digestive issues. Show me a woman in middle age that's not experiencing some alteration in digestion. And I mean, like, everyone does to some degree or another. But it's a very, very important aspect of the aging process. Can we properly break down estrogen and its metabolites and get rid of it out of the body? And so whether it's dealing with chronic constipation, chronic stress, so many of these women, they think it's not important. Like I was talking to a gastroenterologist on my podcast, and I was asking her, how do you define constipation? And she said, well, it's really like asking the patient, do you perceive you have a problem going to the bathroom? And she said, some people, they poop 5 days a week and they're fine with that. Some people tell me they poop 3 days a week. And I'm like, do you have a problem with that? And they say no. And she's like, okay, well, it's not ideal, but it doesn't bother you. And intrinsically, we don't see any signs that this is pathologic. And I said to her, I was like, oh my God, if I wasn't pooping at least once or twice a day, I'd be like, what is wrong? But I think for so many of us, whatever our normal is what we anticipate is normal. And so I think in many instances, it's helping women understand the health of your microbiome impacts symptoms. The health of your microbiome impacts how well you get rid of excess estrogen. The health of your microbiome impacts nearly every body system that's out there. And if anyone is not looking at the health of your microbiome in some capacity, even starting with a really good history, really good symptoms, they're missing out, because perimenopause and menopause is more than just slapping on an estrogen patch. I think there's a lot of great voices out there that are educating women that HRT is an option, but there's just as many people simplifying it to a point where they're like, just take HRT and that's going to fix everything.
Yeah.
Because a lot of these women end up in my office, well, my virtual office, or in programs, and they'll tell me I'm doing everything right. I'm sleeping, I manage my stress, I exercise, I eat healthy, and they're on HRT and they still don't feel good. Right. And I'm like, well, this is probably more the norm than not, that women are like trying to figure out the power of the N of one, like what are we missing here? And more often than not, it is adverse childhood events, chronic stress, and it is the gut. And they constantly interface with one another. Whether or not you can see the microbiome or not, it is as important as your heart, your brain, your lungs, your bladder. I mean, everything. It is as important. It's just the virtual organ because we can't like touch it or see it.
It is. It's the root of the root. And you can never out supplement or out hormone your diet. It is ground zero. And a functional gut is ground zero. And back in my early functional medicine days, I remember, hearing people speak about cancer and longevity. And, they would say, fix the gut, support liver detox. You'll be so much better off. And it is. It's so simple that people overlook it. And they want to skirt around it and take some greens powders and think that, they're going to be okay, or slap on a patch. And not the case, my friend. Not the case.
And I think, I decided when I was writing the book and thinking about the messaging and thinking about those little quips that, those little sound bites that people want to hear on social media. And I kept coming back to that patch comment, because I think we have this reductionistic methodology around middle age that it's just about replenishing hormones. And then let me be clear, I'm very pro HRT. I'm very pro women choosing for themselves if that is the right choice. But any good provider is going to also talk to you about these other aspects. I was talking to a longevity and expert in this space, someone that you and I know. I was talking to him earlier today, and I was making the argument for why the gut microbiome really needs to take center stage. And I was like, not just now, but for the rest of a woman's life. And I made the argument, and he walked away and said, oh my gosh, I want you to present to my clinicians. I want you to talk about it. Can you do a presentation in 2 weeks? And I said, absolutely. And he said, I'm so grateful you're doing this work because no one's talking about this. And I said, I know, and that's okay. But I just think this is this burgeoning aspect to middle-age care that is not getting the attention it deserves, in a way that all the other players in the kind of perimenopause and menopause space, everyone's doing great work, but there's this like missing aspect of this conversation that I think really does lend itself to having a bigger conversation. Like, we should all be talking about this in some capacity, or at least addressing it, because if your gut microbiome is not optimal, all these other interventions are not going to work quite as well. They really won't. They absolutely won't.
That's right. And that is too why I do, stool tests on every one of my clients, because leaky gut, leaky brain, inflamed gut, inflamed, immune system, inflamed brain, inflamed joints, fatigue. We don't realize just how much it impacts, even, depression, anxiety. Where's our serotonin produced? Where's our dopamine produced? We have to fix the gut. It is always ground zero for transformation and just feeling incredible. Can you talk a bit about gut and bone health? Because I thought that was just such a cool, fascinating part of your book. I feel like bone health is so under-examined and undereducated. Like no one goes to their doctor and is hearing, you've got to fix your gut if you want strong bones. You've got to optimize your hormones if you want strong bones. Like what, can you speak on that a little bit? Because I just absolutely love the crossover and also how leaky gut impacts bone health too.
Oh yeah. So think about leaky gut, leaky bone, leaky gut, leaky brain. I mean, it is that interrelated. So there is a gut bone axis. And like I said earlier, the health of your gut is highly dependent on the health of your bones. And so when I think about women hearing estradiol is primary prevention for osteoporosis, that is great that information is out there. However, as estrogen is declining and as progesterone is declining, there are changes going on in the gut microbiome, like things like progesterone is a smooth muscle relaxant. Estrogen is intricately interwoven with nitric oxide production. So as those are declining, people will say, I feel like food sits in my stomach longer. I feel like I don't digest food quite as well. But when you stop eating carbohydrates or you stop eating fiber, I want you to understand the net impact of that. And I just interviewed a gut microbiome expert, and at the very end of the conversation said there was this new paper that talks about, people that just eat a carnivore diet, how in the absence of fiber, it impacts the microbiome substantially. Now, I'm not talking about a therapeutic elimination for a couple months. I'm talking about long-term carnivore. And we could unpack that separately. But if you're not eating fiber, and with this decline in hormones, your body is making less short-chain fatty acids. Short-chain fatty acids are important. So when you eat fiber, goes through your digestive system, gets to the colon, and in the colon, these little colonocytes, they ferment the fiber and they create these signaling molecules, which are called short-chain fatty acids. So probably the most common one is butyrate. And so butyrate's really important. Butyrate can cross the blood-brain barrier. So it's this signaling molecule. And the body is designed to make the blood-brain barrier impermeable, but most of us probably have a leaky brain because we have a leaky gut. But getting back to these short-chain fatty acids and fiber, so as your body is making less of these, your consumption of fiber intake is critically important. It is important for a variety of reasons. Short-chain fatty acids do things like reduce inflammation. They're involved in endogenous GLP-1 regulation, so our own satiety hormones. They're involved in mucus production within the digestive system. And I know mucus sounds kind of gross, but it's really important because it's protective. And why this is particularly relevant to bone. So our bone is a living tissue. It is not just a structure. It's not just a coat hanger. What starts to happen is with this decline in estrogen and progesterone, we get more bone breakup than buildup. So building bone are osteoblasts and bone breakdown is osteoclasts. Osteoblasts are primarily driven by estrogen. So as you can imagine, as estrogen is declining, this balance, this symphony between these two hormones gets imbalanced. And what's interesting is short-chain fatty acids help with supporting the balance between bone buildup and bone breakdown. So when you have declining hormones, you get more osteoclastic bone breakdown, and short-chain fatty acids actually slow that process. So another reason why fiber is so important, fiber helps create short-chain fatty acids, which slow the bone breakdown process. Now that osteoclastic activity, which is the bone breakdown process, really starts to accelerate if you are eating a diet devoid of fiber. Now, I'm not talking about going out and consuming 50 grams a day. I'm just saying, be cognizant of where you consume fiber. A lot of times people don't cook their vegetables and they get really bloated when they eat fibrous vegetables. And I'm like, listen, there's so many different ways to get these into our diet. I always say track first to figure out where you are. Like Esther, I'm sure you have patients that come through your programs that they're consuming 10 grams, 12 grams. That's not enough. And so I always say aim for more, not all at once, because the gut microbiome has to adjust to your fiber intake. So if you're consuming 10 a day and you go to 30, you're going to be really upset with Esther and I. And you're going to say, wait a minute, it doesn't work for me. So I would say sometimes it's quantity, sometimes it's quality of fiber. Before you start adding supplements with fiber in them, try to get it from food. One of my like cheats is a tablespoon of fresh ground flax and chia seeds, one of each. I throw it into smoothies like almost every day. I have that. And I'm like, that is fantastic. Not only is it some plant-based fiber, which normally you won't hear me talk about, but it's a complete protein, especially with the chia seeds. And it can be a really great way to get some fiber into your diet. And generally people tolerate it really well. Like they will say to me, it's not like if I eat 2 cups of Brussels sprouts and then I'm...
You could clear a room with that.
Yeah, exactly. We call it fartichokes or artichokes. But helping people understand.
How have I lived this long and never heard that? I mean,
artichoke.
That is word porn for me.
Yeah. No, I was like, this is an Esterism. But like helping people understand fiber is so important. We need more as we get older, not less. And if you don't tolerate any fiber, that is very likely a sign that your microbiome is off. I can tell you, Esther, after 6 weeks of antibiotics and antifungals in 2019, I was 9 months of full carnivore because I had chronic diarrhea. Like, I'm just going to put that out there. That's not a pretty picture. It took me about 18 months to tolerate vegetables. And when I say tolerate, eat enough of them that I felt like I enjoyed it without getting diarrhea. So my gut was decimated. The microbiome was decimated. And there was a paper that just came out that looked at 1 round of antibiotics can change the microbiome for up to 8 years. I'm going to say this again. 1 round of antibiotics. This is not a reason not to take antibiotics because clearly there's a time and a place for this, but it's also being really proactive about what you eat around the antibiotics, what you consume after you're done with antibiotics. But it gives you a sense like the microbiome is dynamic. But if you get rid of all the beneficial bacteria in order to clear something that doesn't belong, it takes time to repopulate the microbiome. But I thought that was an interesting paper, largely because I think I had read before it's 18 months, 24 months. 8 years is substantial. Like that is, oh my gosh, but it makes sense. I'm now 8 years out. I'm 7 going on 8 years. And so for me, I think it took me, I think it took 5 years because I had a colonoscopy in 2020 and one in 2025. New gastroenterologist, had my old records. And when he was done, he said, that's like the gold standard colonoscopy. No internal hemorrhoids, no inflammation, no nothing, no polyps, thank God. And he said, what are you doing differently? I said, I radically increased my fiber. And he said, great, keep doing it. He's like, I wish all my patients had like the gold star colonoscopy. And so I think for a lot of people, it's the understanding that, yes, we can have an insult that can impact our health. Yes, we have to work diligently to repopulate the gut. It doesn't start with throwing probiotics at it. Now, fermented foods and probiotic-rich foods, yes, of course. But I want people to understand it's less about supplementation and certainly more about lifestyle management. Like I always say major in the majors, like sleep, stress management, nutrition, exercise, targeted nutrition, and then like dealing with your stuff. Like I'm very much a believer that most, if not all of us, have stuff we have to deal with. Like I'm sure I will be dealing with stuff for the rest of my life, but I have found Substack to be a great place to start talking about some of those deeper things, like the stuff that's kind of ugly. Like I wrote a Substack in February, and it was like I had people coming out of the woodwork that I had known my entire life in some capacity or another. Some of whom said, I was raped in college, I never told anyone. Or I had the same thing happen to me with a stepfather, or I had the same thing happen to me with a boy. Like people sharing. And I said, the shame and secrecy that Gen X has experienced, I'm not saying it's unique to us, but I think Gen X is finding a platform to share things in a way that gives other women permission to talk. Because isn't that what's most important? Because if we continue to internalize all of this stuff, it erodes our health. It's like caustic. Remember I said cortisol is caustic over time. And I think that it's caustic, it's corrosive. And that's where I think these conversations are so important for women to be having, so that they understand, like, oh, I see this person on social media, I assume their life's perfect. Oh, far from it. Like, ask my husband.
Far from it. Well, yeah. In the 70s, some pretty dark shit went down in the 70s. We've all had some creepy neighbors, getting creeped on, mishandled, sexually, abused.
Babysitters, family friends. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. But can I circle back for a second at the risk of it sounding insensitive? I just have to know, because I've run thousands of GI maps at this point. I see the decimation of the microbiome when women do go on a carnivore diet. So how did you go from heavy antibiotics to carnivore diet to actually getting your microbiome back? And how did you know when it was time to bring in vegetables? Because that's fascinating. I've not heard a story like yours before.
No, well, I can tell you, I got tired of just eating meat, cooked meat, stewed meat. Like, I couldn't even tolerate fish. I mean, it was not fun, like boiled chicken. I mean, it was very boring. For me, personally, very boring. I like vegetables. So for me, it was kind of I craved Brussels sprouts. It was the wildest thing. So I just listened to my body. And I remember having a conversation with my gastroenterologist. I remember Dr. Ann Ma, she was like a pit bull. She was amazing, so smart, and took no crap from anybody. She was one of these few female gastroenterologists at a time when there were no female gastroenterologists. And I remember her telling me, I'm not worried about your diarrhea. It's eventually going to go away. So I was like, well, that's great, but it kind of makes it hard to be a traveling human. It kind of makes it hard to go out to dinner. It makes it hard to do anything where I'm not in my home. And she was correct. It eventually got better and went away. But for me, I listened to my body. When I really started to crave vegetables, I would reintroduce them in small amounts. I figured out which ones I tolerated better. I knew I couldn't eat more than like half a cup. I was lucky at the beginning, it was like tablespoons of stuff, and which, when you're bored of eating just meat, you really want to eat the vegetables. And so there was a combination, at least initially, of dietary kind of introduction of foods based on what I was interested in. So remember, at this point, I was gluten-free, dairy-free, and grain-free. So my world was very small. It was very, very small. And so it got boring pretty quickly for me. But it started off with just leaning into what I was interested in eating, and then slowly introducing specific supplements, because I knew that I had destroyed my brush border enzymes. I knew that there was so much that needed to be done to the microbiome to help replenish it. So it was a lot of slowly adding in fermented foods, slowly adding in, like, could I tolerate some IgG, really looking specifically, what are the things I can tolerate? Doing diagnostic testing to look at, like, where are my micronutrient deficiencies, which I had a lot of by that point. You can imagine, like, I wasn't absorbing anything. Yeah. I was still really, really skinny because I was not absorbing any food. So when I was in the hospital, I lost 15 pounds, but it took me a long time to gain the weight back because I just wasn't absorbing anything. And so it went from that to targeted supplements and not any great, not a ton of stuff. It was more like quiet the inflammation in my body and let me sleep. And those were like my two priorities. But when we started looking at stool testing, my keystone bacteria was off. My digestive enzymes were in the toilet. Thankfully, I had no issues with calprotectin, which can be an inflammatory marker. But very clearly, there's a lot of dysbiosis, not surprisingly, because all the beneficial bacteria had been killed off, along with the bad stuff. And so it took time to repopulate, replenish, and things were done really slowly. Like, I was not going to stress about it, because stressing about it was just going to make it worse. The last time I did stool testing was probably 2 years ago. Generally, I like to do stool testing every year, but I got to a point where I was like, I had so much stress in 2024, and then in 2025, I was like, I don't need to intrinsically see anything. Like, I'm pretty sure I know what I'm going to see when I do look. Yeah. And so then I got much more interested in the micronutrient testing, fatty acid analysis. And so that's where I've been bringing in some pretty big things to heal and seal the gut, get really proactive about replenishing. Like, because I don't eat dairy, my C15 was really low. I was deficient in omega-6 fatty acids because I try to avoid seed oil. So it just became this you go down one rabbit hole and then you have 5 other things that you're doing.
Right.
Most
Dark side of
definitely.
functional medicine.
Yeah, you get to a point where like I know that I feel good. I know that my weight is healthy. I know that I know my inflammatory markers are down. So it's like we could intrinsically kind of look at things and say, okay, you look better on paper now than you did 6 months ago, 12 months ago. And so it's been a process. Like, I don't want anyone listening to think it was like I snapped my fingers and everything got better. And to be totally transparent, in 2019, I didn't fully appreciate how much the loss of estrogen impacted my immune function and my gut. And so for anyone who doesn't know, estrogen acts like, if you think about the small intestinal lining, which is one cell layer thick, it acts like a brick and mortar. Estrogen's the mortar. So as estrogen is declining, you're more likely to have leaky gut. If you have leaky gut, you've got a provoked immune system. You've got probably underlying food sensitivities. And so it just really sets you up for just having all sorts of dysbiotic organisms, leaky gut, autoimmune issues. We know the immune system becomes more inflammatory. We're just easily provoked. And it also means like things don't work quite as well. Like we already have a provoked immune system, and it's like a cranky, it's like I have a dog that's 14 and we describe him as kind of like a cranky old man. We've got like a cranky old lady gut if we're not actively working against it. The thing that's really encouraging, Esther, is that if you look at the research on younger women's gut microbiomes versus perimenopause versus postmenopause, if a woman in postmenopause, I hate that term, I like to just say menopause, a woman in menopause, her microbiome can resemble a younger woman's microbiome simply by using hormone replacement therapy.
Yes.
So to me, I think what's coming, the research is certainly suggesting, we don't yet have a primary indication for HRT to protect the gut microbiome, but I think that will come in time, just based on the research that I was able to kind of look at in preparation for the book. And that I think is really exciting. It just gives us another reason. It's not just about bone. It's not just about heart protection. There's actually more to it, like more to this nuanced conversation.
Okay, I love all of this, but I want to do a quick lightning round because we are almost out of time. All right, so what are your top 4 favorite midlife/menopause gut supplements that you would take with you on a desert island?
Okay, I would say number 1 is magnesium, because I don't know anyone who doesn't need, it has like 400 enzymatic reactions in the body, and I would have to be true to my cardiology self. Like, rarely do I see women with optimal magnesium. It gets depleted with stress. It helps with sleep. It helps with relaxation. So magnesium's number 1. Without question, TUDCA, which I know we didn't talk about, but this is a very important supplement. So when I mentioned that as estrogen declines, our bile doesn't work quite as effective. So bile is responsible for breaking down and emulsifying fats. What I see in a lot of middle-aged women is they have a lot of elevated steatocrit, which means they're pooping out a lot of fecal fat because their body can't break it down. So this is where estrogen therapy becomes important, but also TUDCA. And TUDCA also helps with mitochondrial health, brain health, brain signaling. So TUDCA would be number 2. I would say number 3, creatine. Creatine monohydrate.
Girl.
And it should be Crea Pure or Crea Vitalis. Don't let anyone tell you that any old plain creatine works. Creatine monohydrate is what is best studied. And, there's even research to suggest it's helpful for the gut epithelial layer. It's not just about muscle strength. It's not just about bone health. It's not just about brain health. It's not just about preventing jet lag. Creatine monohydrate is one of these multi-purpose supplements. So if you're noticing, each one of these does a lot of different things. And then maybe the last one would be, talk about sleep support. Because sleep is so intricately interwoven in the microbiome. So we have circadian clocks in our guts. If I was thinking about sleep, either myo-inositol, which I think is like a total game changer for people. I think we used to think about it for blood sugar regulation, but now that we have GLP-1s, I'm like, no. Myo-inositol for sleep, or an adaptogenic herb, because most of my female patients, even if they are on progesterone, even if they are on estrogen, even if they're on testosterone, sometimes their sleep can go south. And that's where I think adaptogens, whether it's ashwagandha, rhodiola, velour, I think can be really, really helpful. Now, I bet you thought I was going to say butyrate, but I'm kind of on the fence about
Depends,
butyrate.
because not everyone needs it. Some people are
Correct.
making enough butyrate in the gut. So it's really, that's where stool testing can help you customize. But for those of you listening, Cynthia makes a gorgeous, gorgeous creatine that I actually trust. So you can find it. All right, last question. What are your top 3 ways you love to pamper yourself? What is like your favorite self-care right now?
It's funny. It used to be like, I want to go to the spa. And now I'm like, all right, what are the things I really crave? I think, honestly, being like having all my kids home, like that to me is like the greatest joy. It's really hard when, we've got one out and one who will soon be out. So we will soon be open doors. I don't want to say the word empty nest. So for me, like for me as a human being, having my kids home and doing stuff with my family. Number 2 would be, like having a day where I get to just sleep in. But like I have dogs, so we don't really sleep in, but like sleeping until I wake up, followed by some form of exercise, but like being able to lay on a PMF mat, being able to do all those like little self-care gadgets I have at home that most days I'm like running around because there's so many things to do. Connection to nature, like walking with my dogs. I mean, I keep it pretty simple. If you would ask me 5 years ago, I'd have been like, when I go to the spa and I get to do this, and I love massages and I love facials and I love all the pampering, but like the things that I know fill my cup and make me feel centered and grounded and happy are simple. And that is, we overcomplicate everything. Like we think it has to be about the latest gadget, and trust me, I've got all the gadgets and I enjoy the gadgets, but the simple stuff is really what we need to master and do consistently. Because it's easy to get caught up in the hype over the next thing. Like I'm almost hesitant when I'm like teaching or talking about things to plug a product, even if it's something I love, because I'm like, listen, I don't want you to go buy the product. What I want you to do is do the foundational, major in the majors, because that is going to yield the biggest benefits, as opposed to, although I like them, some of the fun gadgets that are out there. I know that was probably more than 4.
Amen. No, that was context. That was gorgeous. So where can people go to order the Menopause Gut and to find you and your incredible podcast?
Thank you. So probably easiest, the Menopause Gut can be purchased anywhere where books are sold. Amazon, Target, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. If you have a local bookstore, please buy from your local bookstore. I still feel like, even though we're 6 years post-pandemic, I still feel like a lot of the brick and mortar businesses are still recovering. With that being said, my website is a great place to go. There's a banner at the top, www.cynthiathurlow.com. If you buy the book in pre-sale, and we will extend that until a week after publication. So I believe it's May 3rd. The pre-sale bonuses we're going to extend for a week after publication so that you can get them. And we created pre-sale bonuses that you'll actually use, not another pantry guide. But I'm active across social media, probably most active on Instagram. I have a free Facebook group called the Midlife Pause / my name, which was initially the name of the book, but then we realized we needed to be more specific. And in terms of my favorite place to play right now, it's probably Substack, because that's where you can really get some insights into what I'm thinking about, things that I think are really valuable. I can dive into really personal stuff in a good way. I think it's a way that people realize that we should not have shame and secrecy about our childhood and young adult experiences. These are things that we should be able to talk openly about, because it helps other women feel comfortable and confident coming forward and getting the help that they need and deserve.
Amen. You're a fucking rock star, girl. I'm so proud of you, and I just wish you all the success and joy your heart can hold with this book launch.
Thank you, my friend.
Yeah. If you loved this episode, follow or subscribe to the Midlife Realignment wherever you listen to podcasts and on YouTube, and leave a review to help other women find this show.